Have you ever noticed that your reaction to something seemingly insignificant feels far too intense? Someone makes an innocent remark, and suddenly your whole body tightens, as if you have just been betrayed. A colleague forgets to mention your name, and out of nowhere comes the feeling of rejection, as though you have been dismissed or excluded. Perhaps you are familiar with that weight of guilt that arises for no apparent reason, as if you constantly need to apologize or justify yourself. Or maybe you have seen the same patterns repeat over and over again. Relationships where you are overlooked, a workplace where your efforts go unrecognized, friendships where you give far more than you receive. If any of this sounds familiar, it is not a coincidence. More often than not, such reactions are rooted in an unfinished story that still lives within you. Trauma is not only about the events of the past, it is about the way the psyche tried to cope when there were not enough resources to endure what happened. It lingers in the way we respond today. We may think, "That was long ago, I have already moved on." But in reality, the past continues to reveal itself. Through the body, through our thoughts, through our emotions, and through the relationships we form. In this video, we will look closely at the signs of unresolved trauma and how they may be present in your life. You may recognize yourself, or perhaps someone close to you. Most importantly, you may notice patterns that have remained hidden until now, because the very moment of recognition is where the process of healing truly begins. The first sign is repeating patterns in relationships. Have you ever noticed that no matter how different your relationships appear at first glance, they all seem to lead to the same familiar outcome? A new partner, a new job, a new friendship. Yet eventually the same feeling returns. You are not being heard, not being valued, and once again your boundaries are ignored. It is as if you are watching a play in which the actors change, but the script remains exactly the same. The mind is wired to try to rewrite old experiences. Unconsciously, we are drawn towards situations that resemble the ones that once hurt us, in the hope that this time the ending will be different. In psychology, this is known as the compulsion to repeat, an inner attempt to seek relief where there was once pain. But as long as the trauma remains unresolved, the story unfolds along the same path. Instead of finding freedom, we are confronted once again with confirmation of our deepest fears. I was not heard. I was not important. In romantic relationships, this can look like a series of similar stories. You meet different people, but each time you end up facing coldness, criticism, or indifference, and you once again throw yourself into earning affection. At work, it may take the form of a boss who resembles a strict or disapproving parent. Someone who constantly demands more than you can give, while you keep agreeing out of fear of losing your place. In friendships, it can show up as people taking advantage of your kindness, while you continue to give, as though you are afraid of being left completely alone if you stop. Sometimes the pattern is even subtler. You find yourself choosing emotionally unavailable partners, or staying in groups where your voice is dismissed and your opinions carry little weight. The unconscious mind gravitates toward the familiar pain, repeating the same old message: in order to belong, I must earn love. It is like opening the same book again and again, hoping for a different ending. But the plot does not change until you decide to pick up another book. If you have ever caught yourself thinking, "Why does this keep happening? Why am I back here again?" It is a powerful signal. It points to an unfinished experience within you, waiting for acknowledgement. The second sign is intense reactions to small triggers. Have you ever found yourself thrown off balance by something that, on the surface, seems far too small to justify such a strong reaction? A tone of voice that felt off, a harmless joke, a fleeting glance, and suddenly it feels as if an alarm has been set off inside. Your heart races. A wave of anger or hurt surges through you, and you feel dismissed, humiliated, or abandoned all over again. At work, it might be an innocent comment from a colleague that feels like a public put-down. In a relationship, it could be the delayed reply to a message, or a short fine that feels loaded with rejection. At home, it might be a simple phrase from a loved one that unexpectedly cuts so deep it feels like betrayal. The truth is, these reactions are not about the present moment. The psyche holds on to old pain, and every time a current situation even faintly resembles it, your body and emotions respond as though the past is happening again. A small trigger becomes a doorway through which an old memory rushes back. It is much like touching skin that has been burned. Even gentle warmth can sting, because the body remembers the fire. In the same way, trauma makes you react not to what is happening right now, but to what has already happened and never found resolution. From a psychological perspective, traumatic experience is stored not only in memory, but also in the body. The brain interprets the signal as a threat and activates protective mechanisms, even when there is no real danger. This is why the reaction feels so overwhelming, like an avalanche crashing down from a single loose stone. Perhaps you have noticed this in yourself. Someone says something trivial, but you replay it in your mind for hours, consumed with anger, shame, or the urge to explain yourself. It is important to remember that the storm is not truly about the present moment. It is about the past that still lives within you. The next sign is avoidance. Sometimes we get used to living as if a whole part of reality simply doesn't exist. It is as though we cut entire pieces out of our lives. We never speak about the past. We don't return to certain places. We avoid conversations that might stir up pain. At first glance, this looks like protection, a way to keep ourselves safe. But the cost of that protection eventually becomes far too high. Imagine a house with a closed room you never enter. The door is locked tight, the lights are off, and after a while it almost feels as if the room isn't there at all. But deep down you know it exists. And the longer you avoid it, the stronger the anxiety grows about what might be inside. The psyche works in the same way. Avoidance doesn't erase the problem. It only turns it into a constant shadow. For example, a person may avoid intimacy because they fear it will end the same way it did once before. They stay close to people on the surface, but continue to feel alone. Another might refuse to engage in conflicts, even when it is necessary to stand up for themselves. Because the subconscious insists, conflict means danger. At work, this can look like constant compliance, agreeing with everything just to escape criticism. At home, it often shows up as silence, the avoidance of difficult topics, even if it erodes trust. From a psychological perspective, avoidance is a defense mechanism. The mind whispers, if I don't go there, if I don't touch that memory, I'll be safe. But in reality, it steals the fullness of life. You cannot build true closeness if you never speak openly. You cannot experience real joy if you are always stepping around the things that remind you of pain. Perhaps you have noticed this in yourself. Postponing uncomfortable conversations, walking away from situations where emotions might flare, or avoiding certain topics even with the people closest to you. In such moments, it feels like you are preserving control, but in truth you are losing the chance for authentic connection and the possibility of healing. The fourth sign is constant tension in the body. You may notice that your body behaves as if danger is still present, even when everything around you is calm. Inside, it feels as though an alarm system is always running. Your shoulders remain tight, your jaw clenched, your breathing shallow, and in your chest there seems to be no room for a full breath. Even at night, when nothing threatens you, the body does not let go. Some grind their teeth in their sleep. Others toss and turn or wake up with anxiety for no clear reason. It is like living in a house where the alarm was never switched off, even though the intruder left long ago. The body carries the memory of a moment when it had to be ready for impact, and it never learned how to shut that system down. It continues to act as though the threat still exists. At work, this often shows up as chronic muscle tension, aching in the back, a head that feels squeezed tight, the constant need for another cup of coffee just to get through the day. At home, it is felt at the dinner table when someone is physically present, but internally still braced for danger. Even during rest, the body refuses to relax, checking the phone, listening for every sound, never truly letting itself exhale. Psychology explains this simply. The body stores traumatic experience. Once upon a time, the nervous system switched on the fight or flight response to protect you, and it never fully switched off. This is why even ordinary daily situations can feel like signals of threat. Perhaps you've noticed it in yourself, being on vacation, surrounded by sea and sunshine, yet unable to relax inside. Or lying down on the couch after a long day and still feeling the body tense, as if awaiting the next blow. These are traces of unresolved trauma that reveal themselves through the body. And chronic tension never disappears without consequence. It leads to fatigue, insomnia, headaches, digestive issues. We often tell ourselves, "I'm just tired, I've worked too hard." But in reality, the body is speaking. There is a story inside me you have not yet faced. The fifth sign is difficulties with trust. Trust is always a step forward. It is like opening a door and allowing another person into the most vulnerable space of your life. To do so requires risk. The willingness to believe that you will not be betrayed, deceived, or abandoned. Yet if your past includes experiences where trust was met with pain, every new connection begins to feel like a potential threat. You may genuinely long for closeness, while at the same time living in constant anticipation of disappointment. In relationships, this often shows up as jealousy, repeated checks, or the urge to control everything. At work, it may appear as suspicion toward colleagues, even if they have proven reliable many times before. In family life, it can look like emotional withdrawal. A person is physically present, but remains at a distance, because opening up feels equal to becoming dangerously exposed. It is similar to someone walking across a bridge, testing every plank with their foot, expecting that it might collapse at any moment. They still move forward, but every step is weighed down with tension. Trust works in much the same way. Relationships may be progressing, yet deep inside there is a constant unease that everything could fall apart without warning. Psychologists explain this simply. At some point in the past, trust itself became a wound. Perhaps it was parents who failed to meet expectations, or a friendship where betrayal cut too deeply, or a relationship in which honesty was used against you. That old memory imprinted the belief that trust is dangerous, and it settled firmly inside. Maybe you've noticed this in yourself. Someone shows you genuine care, yet an inner voice immediately says, "This is too good to be true." Or a loved one makes a promise, and before they've even had a chance to fulfill it, you are already preparing for disappointment. These are not reactions to the present, but echoes of old pain. Living in this state turns life into a constant waiting for the ground to give way. And the paradox is cruel. The stronger the desire for closeness, the stronger the inner resistance, because each step toward trust feels far too risky. The sixth sign is the feeling of emptiness. There are times when a person seems to have everything required for a normal life. A stable job, a family, a set of responsibilities they fulfill without fail. From the outside, everything appears fine, but inside, there is silence. The joy of success is muted, the pleasure of living fades, and the inner flame feels extinguished. It is like a house fully furnished, yet none of its rooms are warmed by light or fire. Such a person can smile, socialize, and play their roles as expected. But the sensation of emptiness becomes a constant backdrop. Nothing provides genuine satisfaction. Not work, not purchases, not even long-awaited achievements. Joy may spark for a moment, but it dies down quickly, leaving the lingering sense that something essential is still missing. At work, this often shows up as tasks being completed without engagement, as though on autopilot. In family life, it appears as being physically present but emotionally absent, doing things out of obligation rather than connection. In relationships, it might look like a partner receiving attention and care, but without true depth or intimacy behind it. Psychologically, this emptiness is often rooted in a part of the self that was frozen at the moment of trauma. At that time, the psyche shut down emotions as a survival strategy, and later that shutdown became permanent. Life goes on, but not in its fullness. It is as if you are living only a fraction of yourself. Perhaps you have caught yourself thinking, I have everything I'm supposed to. I do everything right, but I don't feel happy. That is the voice of inner emptiness. It is like a silent scream within. Outwardly, everything is fine, yet the soul feels cut off from its source of joy. And it is important to understand that no external achievement can fill this void. It does not vanish with new purchases, career milestones, or even temporary pleasures. The cause is not outside, but within, in the part of you that once froze in pain and is still waiting to be noticed. The seventh sign is addictive behaviors. When the pain inside becomes too heavy to bear, the mind looks for ways to shut it off, even if only for a short while. And so a person gravitates toward habits that bring quick but ultimately illusory comfort. For some, it is alcohol or food. For others, gambling, endless shopping, mindless scrolling through social media feeds, or even throwing themselves into work without pause. From the outside, these behaviors may look very different, but at their core, they are all attempts to escape from inner pain. In the moment, such habits create the illusion of protection. A glass of wine dampens anxiety. A new purchase brings a brief rush of joy. Overworking leaves no space for uncomfortable thoughts or feelings. Yet the relief is deceptive. It is like drinking salt water. The more you drink, the stronger your thirst becomes. The emptiness does not vanish. It only deepens. And with it grows the sense of helplessness. Within family life, this may show up as the habit of spending hours glued to a phone or computer. It feels easier to lose yourself in a screen than to risk an honest conversation that might stir up old pain. At work, it appears as chronic overwork. It is simpler to drown in endless tasks than to admit exhaustion or face your own anxiety. In relationships, it can manifest as an urge to fill the void with gifts or constant distractions rather than speaking openly and deeply. From a psychological point of view, addictions are quick fixes to silence emotions that feel unbearable. The mind seeks immediate relief, even if that very choice drains the long-term strength needed to confront the real source of the pain. Perhaps you have noticed this in yourself. The habit seems to help in the moment, but afterward you feel even more tired, emptier, or weighed down by guilt. This is the paradox of addictive behavior. It offers temporary comfort, but distances you from genuine change. The eighth sign is inability to handle emotions. Emotions are energy, a vital force that helps us navigate life. Joy draws us closer to others. Anger protects our boundaries. Sadness allows us to grieve and heal. Yet when a person carries traumatic experiences, emotions stop being allies and start to feel like threats, something to be fought against or hidden away. One common pattern is suppression. A person seems to turn off the sound inside themselves. They do not argue. They do not show anger. They do not allow themselves to cry. Outwardly, they appear calm, but within they store tension, which eventually hardens into resentment, fatigue, and a sense of disconnection. The opposite pattern is explosive. Even the slightest pressure can unleash a storm, an outburst of anger, tears, sharp words, followed by guilt and the sense of having lost control. Within family life, this might look like a constant habit of holding back, never voicing what truly hurts, but gradually withdrawing from those closest to you. In relationships, it may erupt as sudden fights over trivial matters, when something small becomes the final straw. At work, it often shows up as retreat. A single critical comment from a supervisor is experienced as deep invalidation, and the person withdraws for days, consumed by self-doubt. Psychologically, the root lies in the fact that the mind never learned how to process emotions safely. In the past, strong feelings were tied to pain. Anger may have brought punishment, tears may have invited ridicule, joy may have ended in disappointment. And now, in adulthood, any intense feeling is automatically read as a danger signal. This is too much. I cannot allow it. Perhaps you have seen this in yourself. A heavy weight inside that you cannot put into words, sometimes bursting out in sharp explosions, sometimes settling in the chest like a stone. This does not mean there is something wrong with you. It means only that your mind once learned that emotions are dangerous, and it still follows those old rules today. The ninth sign is excessive guilt. If you often find yourself apologizing even when there is no real reason to, if you automatically take on responsibility for things outside your control and feel compelled to fix problems that were never yours to begin with, this may be a sign of a deep, unresolved wound. In family life, it might look like this. A loved one is upset or dissatisfied, and you immediately feel as though it is your fault. Even if the situation has nothing to do with you, the urge to justify yourself and smooth things over arises instantly. At work, it can take the form of habitually covering for colleagues' mistakes, because admitting "this isn't my fault" feels more unbearable than silently doing extra work. In relationships, it can mean apologizing endlessly, even when you are the one who is hurt or when you have already done everything you could. This kind of guilt does not free you. It traps you. It is like an invisible chain, keeping you in constant tension, forcing you to live with the belief, I am not good enough. I must always fix things. I must earn the right to be here. The roots of this pattern often reach back to childhood. A child may have felt responsible for the moods of their parents. If mother was sad, it was their fault. If father was angry, they must have done something wrong. Over time, this belief hardens into an inner rule. Any dissatisfaction around you must mean you did something bad. Perhaps you recognize this in yourself. The word sorry slips out automatically, before you even consider whether you are actually at fault. Or you feel guilty simply for having needs, asking for help, taking a break, refusing extra work. This is the trace of an old experience that planted the idea. In order to be loved, I must always feel guilty and always be fixing something. But guilt of this kind does not improve your life. It does not strengthen relationships. It erodes them, because it constantly devalues you in your own eyes. And perhaps the most painful truth is that guilt does not set you free. It builds a cage, one in which you no longer feel you have the right to simply exist as you are. The 10th sign is depression and anxiety. Unresolved trauma often shows itself not only through behavior or relationships, but through the general atmosphere of a person's life. It may feel like chronic fatigue. Every morning begins with heaviness, as though your strength has been drained before the day even starts. It may also appear as the loss of interest in things that once brought joy. Books, hobbies, conversations, even simple walks no longer bring color or pleasure, and familiar delights taste dull. Anxiety then becomes the background hum of daily life. Sometimes it is obvious. Your heart races too fast, your body is tense, and you simply cannot relax. At other times, it is subtle, an unshakable sense that something bad is about to happen, like a storm cloud hanging over you that refuses to break. At work, this may appear as fear of not measuring up. Every task feels like a test, one that could expose your inadequacy. At home, it may show up as a sense that everything is fragile, that life could collapse at any moment, even if everything outwardly seems fine. In relationships, it can mean never being able to fully trust or rest beside another person, because an inner voice insists, something will go wrong. Life under these conditions is like walking with a heavy backpack that you cannot take off. You keep moving forward, but every step is harder because the weight of past experience presses down on you constantly. From a psychological perspective, depression and anxiety rarely appear out of nowhere. Almost always they are tied to an unfinished story, suppressed emotions, unspoken pain, reactions that were never allowed expression. These remain lodged within you, and over time they transform into chronic tension and hopelessness. Perhaps you have noticed it in yourself. Outwardly, everything seems normal, but inside life feels like a never-ending struggle. Or you go to bed telling yourself, tomorrow will be easier, only to wake up and feel the same heaviness all over again. This is one of the clearest signs of unresolved trauma, when both body and mind continue to carry a burden too heavy for one person alone. Unresolved trauma can reveal itself in many different ways. In the body, through tension and fatigue; in emotions, through emptiness or sudden outbursts; and in relationships, through repeating patterns and difficulties with trust. We may convince ourselves that the past is long gone, but the truth is that it continues to live within us until we allow ourselves to truly notice it. It is important to understand that recognizing these signs does not mean you are broken. On the contrary, it is a testament to your strength and your readiness for change. Awareness is always the first step toward healing. The path may not always be easy. Sometimes it means having an honest conversation with yourself. Sometimes it requires placing trust in another person, and sometimes it begins with small acts of self-care. Keeping a journal, breathing more deeply, moving your body, or being open with those you trust. These simple practices gradually restore a sense of wholeness and inner stability. And it is essential to remember, healing is not a sudden event, but a process that unfolds step by step. Every small step matters. Always keep in mind, trauma is only a part of your story, but it does not define you in your entirety. You are far greater than your past experiences. There is always the possibility of moving beyond the past and building a new future. If you recognize yourself in these words, it means the process has already begun. The path is always possible. The most important thing is to keep moving forward, even if the steps feel small.